Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to Commercial Drones FM. Today we are live right now over the airwaves with a fairly unique guest. Ben Popper is the business editor with a focus on startups, venture capital, IPOs, and the tech sector. He's published over 800 stories as an editor for The Verge and is passionate about the intersection of culture and technology. His bio on The Verge reads, aspiring drone pilot and parenting robot. And Ben has reviewed in depth some of the most hotly anticipated drones of the past few years, including all the latest DJI drones, Phantom 2, Phantom 3, Inspire, Solo from 3DR, Yuneec Typhoon. Welcome to the show, Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first question would be kind of how did you get into drones? I mean, you're covering drones from a, journalist point of view, but your bio on The Verge reads aspiring drone pilot. So yeah, was it started pre-Verge, or how did you get into them?
Yeah, actually, it's a fun story. It definitely happened because of The Verge. I got sent to South by Southwest to cover the, just all of the tech stuff that was happening there. This was in 2012 or 2013. I guess it was March of 2013. And that was where I first sort of ran into drones. I got to meet Colin Gwynn, who at the time was still CEO North America for DJI. And that was the first time I'd ever flown, ever seen sort of a really advanced, modern camera, quadcopter with a camera on it. And I was just sort of blown away. I wrote a big feature story coming out of that about how all these drones were emerging. They were really powerful. They were really user-friendly, and there weren't a lot of laws in place to deal with the, safety and privacy concerns that they might raise. That ended up being very true. I think most everything I wrote in that article came to pass in terms of media hysteria and unfortunate accidents and, violations of privacy. I mean, luckily, the most catastrophic of the predictions did not occur. And then I got into reviewing them the summer after that. So I think I was at South by in March. And then that summer we did our first sort of like drone roundup at The Verge. We do a series called This Is My Next, where we review a category, smartphones, tablets. That was the first one we did on drones. I was still totally green. I didn't really know what I was doing. I think 3D Robotics sent me an Iris, which at the time was their sort of like consumer facing offering. And I couldn't even like assemble it or get it off the ground. And that was sort of where I started out, reviewing it, thinking about it as a journalist. And I think I pursued the space because, The Verge is very focused on reviewing hardware, thinking about what, changing technology does to society. And drones were sort of a wide open avenue. There were a lot of people here who already had deep history and connections covering smartphones and tablets, things like that. But there was really nobody covering drones. So I thought, well, this is an avenue I should pursue.
Do you guys ever review software? So you mainly do hardware, I believe, but do you ever do any software reviews, maybe non-drone related? I'm curious if you're going to wind up getting into reviewing some of the software behind drones or forward-facing.
I think we do big reviews on like, the new Mac OS or the new Windows. That would pretty much be it for like, software platform reviews. And then, obviously we write a lot about apps and, services that we like or that we think are interesting or controversial. So we write about things that are purely software plays all the time, or companies, like Facebook that are by and large, purely software businesses. On the drone side, I think our coverage now, is primarily newsy. So, if somebody does something silly or stupid with a drone and it makes the news, often we'll hit that. Business related, if Amazon or DHL or UPS just, says something about delivery drones, it's related to the law. We write about, what's going on with the FAA and various regulations, who can fly, when and where. And then the review stuff is, the sort of very straightforward, like we tested a bunch of drones and this is the one you should own, or this, big name new quadcopter came out and here's how it stacks up against the competition.
Gotcha. And for the hardware piece, so when you guys are reviewing these drone platforms, What are some of the criteria that you're really looking for and focusing on? I mean, I'm sure that you guys have, or especially you being the one that's doing spearheading these reviews, that you've kind of I'm sure optimized on what you're really looking for after the technology has how it's progressed. Like, what kind of aspects of the drone hardware do you really focus on to try to give your opinion and your best recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think if you go back and look at the reviews and the stories I was writing in 2013, I was a total beginner. I didn't really know what I was doing. I made a lot of stupid mistakes. I luckily didn't hurt anybody, but I certainly could have. I was still figuring out, what's essential. I think, at the very high level, there are some easy ways to think about it, right? It's, price, performance, and ease of use. So how much are you going to pay for this thing? How much can it deliver, and how easy is it to use? So that is sort of the holy trinity that I think sits above everything else. Below that, we talk about how good is the footage captured by the camera? How long does the battery last? How intuitive is the controller? How reliable is the connection? I would say those are probably the top things that we were thinking about. And then as they started to become standard, how powerful, safe, and easy to use are, the autonomous flight modes, or the sense and avoid options, and what do those let you do, as a beginner or as a professional that you couldn't do in full manual.
And how far have we come since you started in 2013? Do you think, are you really surprised, or are you just like, yeah, pretty good progress? I mean, what's your opinion on how far, like the first drone review you did, and then now whenever you pick up the latest toy or, the latest platform?
Yeah, I mean, it's come a long way. It's really exciting. I mean, I think part of it is driven by sort of the, incredible, progress that has been made in the world of machine learning and computer vision. So it's not, just specific to drones, but drones sort of piggybacking on the great gains that have been made there. But, when I flew that Phantom, which was my first time flying, a camera quad.
Did Colin Gwynn teach you how to fly?
Colin Gwynn taught me how to fly. That is correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was my first experience. So, what it could do was automatic takeoff and landing. It could return to home, and it could do GPS waypoint, and it could do something. It could do things like, maintain. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but forward is always forward, back is always back.
I gotcha.
So regardless of what your actual orientation is. So it had those basic sort of smart features, and I guess you might say autonomous in the sense of takeoff, landing, and return to home. But, that was it. So then CES a year later, I saw drones that were starting to have, sense and avoid, but they certainly weren't released. And a year later, we saw stuff get released that was, doing automatic follow, automatic orbit. And then, in the summer following this year's CES, DJI and Yuneec have both released drones with some, basic sense and avoid, and even some, sort of object computer vision recognition for doing subject tracking. So, yeah, it's come a long way. It's exciting. I mean, I think, in a lot of ways, drones and driverless cars are pursuing the same vision, the same end goal, of autonomous sort of robotic platforms. And drones have an advantage in that they can get into the hands of consumers because they're not as dangerous. They're not as heavily regulated. So we get to sort of play with that stuff before most people get to play with it, Tesla aside.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so Tesla doesn't send you guys cars at this point. Well, actually, wait, you guys have probably reviewed the Tesla.
I don't know. We have an automotive section, which I'm not like super familiar with. So,
no worries.
Yeah, we may have. We probably did. I mean, we certainly write about it all the time.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen a Verge video, at least driving around at some of the events with some of the Tesla launches. Awesome. Okay, so you've written a ton about drones. Let's chat about some of the recent news that you've written about, and and get your opinion on it. So the first topic, and I guess this is kind of one of the most recent, is DJI just released the Geo add-on or feature, or I don't really want to call it an extra app. I'm not even entirely sure if it has its own app that you download, but basically, to borrow from your headline that you wrote, is DJI will now help pilots avoid forest fires, popes, and nuclear power plants. So what's the whole Pope deal? Is that like the Vatican City or something?
So yeah, I mean, when the Pope was visiting New York, for example, the FAA issued a temporary flight restriction. And so that might have been something you saw in the news and paid attention to, or it might have been something that you didn't notice and you went up with a drone, and at that point, you could have been arrested and gotten in a lot of trouble. So, with the Geo system, as long as you were keeping that up to date, if you tried to take off and you were within, a certain distance of the Pope, you would get a warning saying like this area is restricted. So
if it's like restricted because of the Pope?
I don't think so. I think that was just sort of trying to be, cheeky with the headline. But it would say, like there's a temporary flight restriction covering this area, and basically what I'm saying is if they have areas that are covered for, reasons of national security or, a person of that importance, you'll be able to figure it out through Geo and, other temporary things which are interesting like forest fires, fireworks displays, stadiums. I mean, I think this is all well and good. The more information you give to people, the more they can, be proactive about safety. I mean, I guess the one thing that I think, remains sort of glaringly obvious is that this stuff is all opt-in, and that even though, folks have said many times like, well, we restrict flight in certain areas, my experience as a pilot has been that you can take off 100 feet from an airport, 100 feet from a heliport, 100 feet from a stadium. I mean, I've never experienced in my time flying a drone that wouldn't take off because it was in a restricted area. But I don't know. What's your experience been like with that?
Yeah, so sometimes, just for example, at Drone Deploy, we are in San Francisco proper, so we're fairly close to the stadium, the Giants stadium over there. I think it's AT&T Park. I'm not really sure what it's called, but
right.
Sometimes it's like depends on the day. If we're trying to just like take off and do like a quick little 3-foot, 6-foot hover, just to test some things out, we'll have some trouble with the DJI system. But this is pre-Geo that they released. And honestly, I'm not super familiar with Geo, but I do understand that maybe it adds a little bit more dynamic geofencing, whereas, forest fires in your headline, for example, like to me, that's really important as an or I guess I'll always be a commercial pilot since my helicopter certificate doesn't expire, but as someone who used to fly very low level, very often between 400 to 500 feet, and definitely understands the risk of having small drones flying around, especially in a forest fire situation where you have manned aircraft that are trying to suppress the fire. I think that's incredibly useful because everyone's seen it in the news that keeps track of the industry, is that, we'll have some hotshot guys take off, or maybe even gals, and start, recording the fire and recording the helicopter. So if DJI Geo can do its job and really kind of stop people from doing that, or if they have permission and if they're cooperating and coordinating with the, authorities, I mean, then that's a great thing to allow that access. If you can, I think you got to give your credit card information and sign up or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, it's really interesting. It's a step in the right direction. And they were saying, this is only true for airports now, but it could in the future be true for, stadiums, nuclear power plants, prisons, what have you, is that, they'll create this geofence. You can't fly inside of it, but they can sort of whitelist somebody who is authorized to fly in there, whether that's someone in the fire department flying support or someone from the sports stadium, getting, footage of the game or what have, to somebody at the prison, doing security. So that's the ideal. I mean, it is still at this point, sort of trivially easy to go out and buy yourself a quad, that has none of these restrictions, right? Like, you could go to any hobby shop and buy one and put it together and start flying it. But I think, it's sort of this top-down thing where let's work closely with the people who have, far and away the most sales in the industry and, reach the most consumers and then, take it from there.
Cool. Yeah. I think DJI Geo's very positive by virtue of DJI's success. I think that they've been, one of the leaders in the whole geofencing and trying to keep people safe. I think every DJI drone has to come with a know before you fly FAA, pamphlet maybe that's sold
Right.
in the US, something like that. So, okay, cool.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it would be great
go
if,
ahead.
like, for example, let's say they just the FAA and DJI and all the big manufacturers work something out where it's like, well, this drone, comes pre-labeled with an FAA number. You know what I mean? Like all of that stuff, it ends up being in the hands of the consumer. And it's like, I don't think a 14-year-old who goes into the mall where you can now go to like the photo store in the mall, the camera shop in the mall and get this stuff is going to follow through, right? So like,
Yeah.
how are you going to make sure that the drone that somebody puts in the air obeys these geofences, is aware of what's happening in terms of, temporary flight restrictions, and is properly labeled so that if something goes wrong, you can trace it back to the operator. But, like you were saying, like in 2013, when I started writing about it, it was the complete Wild West. Things are a lot, tamer and more regulated now. And, I think we'll continue to move in that direction. I guess I would say, in terms of you, right, being a helicopter pilot, and I've flown a lot in the New York area. I routinely see helicopters taking off and landing along the East River at Brooklyn Bridge Park, where I've seen a lot of people flying, even though they shouldn't be. At that point, the helicopters are at, they're at 0 feet, and then they come up and around the park, and they're at 100 feet. So even if you were staying within the legal range, the situation could present itself for a tragic accident. And I wonder, if the better solution there is, moving forward with vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So if, a pilot is taking off, they know, oh, well, somebody's flying a drone in this area. I got to watch out for them or something along those lines.
Cool. Yeah, very true. I agree that's going to be really interesting to pay attention to and see how this goes forward. It's definitely touchy for some, consumers that live in areas that they believe that they can there's no reason to stay below 400 feet. But anyways, I digress. We'll go ahead and move on to the next topic here, and that is 3D robotics, 3DR.
Right.
So in the news, they've been having layoffs. They released the solo drone, the all black drone. They hired Colin Gwynn after the whole DJI falling out.
Right.
They brought him on as VP of a few things, and looks like they didn't have too much success on the 3D robotics, or I'm sorry, on the solo. It's actually on the Amazon Prime Day at like 40% off. So I don't know if there was any DJI drones at 40% off. But anyways, they pivoted a bit to more commercial play, made some partnerships with Sony and Autodesk, and now they're starting to do photogrammetry and things like that. So what is your what's your opinion on just like the hardware? I mean, you reviewed the Solo. I'm sure it had a long ways to go, and I know they're continuing to update it. But yeah, any thoughts on the current state of 3DR and maybe some of the challenges that they're facing in the drone industry?
Yeah, well, I think the challenge is that DJI has become just a complete monster. I mean, they move so fast. They're at such a bigger scale than everybody else, and they have incredible connections and brand. Anytime you see somebody talk about a drone in the press, almost inevitably they use a picture of a DJI drone. All of the big Hollywood directors who are talking about using drones for aerial cinematography or using DJI equipment because they already had great inroads in Hollywood through the Ronin. The
Ronin is the it's like the stable. Just so if people don't know, it's like a stabilized.
It's like a handheld camera stabilizer. So they started out doing flight controllers, then they moved into doing drones. They built their own aerial gimbals, and then they parlayed that experience building gimbals into this Ronin, which ended up being an extremely popular tool, for high-end film and TV professionals.
Gotcha.
And so I think that, here's the way I would say it sort of looks to me now is, if everybody had started at the same time with the same funding in 2012, 2013, I think 3D robotics, and others could have had a good shot at it. But now I think they're trying to gain market share and gain mind share at a time when they cannot produce at a quality or consistency of DJI. I don't think anybody can do that, and certainly not have as many iterations. I don't think anybody is moving as fast as them forward. And especially when you look at the number of things they're releasing. I mean, like you said, 3D Robotics sort of thought, okay, we were going to be the DIY company. We were going to be DIY with a little bit of, industrial commercial in there. And then they said, you know what, like people are just using the consumer ones on the commercial side. We better get a great consumer product out there. They struggled with that. It was delayed. It didn't ship with the gimbal. When the gimbal did ship, it didn't work well. And that was really painful for them. A lot of people who ordered them sent them back or wrote terrible reviews. I thought at the time I reviewed it that summer that they had better autonomous software than DJI, but certainly not better hardware. And now, DJI has quickly, come up to par in autonomous software, exceeded them in computer vision, and continues to outperform everyone in terms of hardware. So when you stop and look at the landscape right now, it's hard to see how somebody would catch them. I think it would have to come, sort of orthogonally, like it would have to be something like the Lily or, another drone like that, where it's something that, just takes a totally different approach, and for some reason, captures a certain, moment or change in technology that DJI wasn't thinking about. And then, they're able to go from there. I mean, what I would compare it to is, let's say you wanted to launch a smartphone in 2008 or 2009, right? And you wanted to compete with Apple. Well, really, you'd have to be Google, and you'd have to convince 5 or 10 incredible hardware manufacturers who have incredible experience and incredible scale to get on board with your software platform, because there's just no way you're going to compete with 1,500, probably soon 2,000 engineers working in Shenzhen, hand in hand with the executive team and the design team, prototyping new stuff every day and seeing it roll off the factory floor. I mean, there is just no way you're going to compete with that.
I just read, I forgot who wrote it or what publication it was, but it was an interview with I forget, one of the guys, Paul Pan, I think, at DJI, product manager, and he was just saying, 1,500 engineers, as you said, and sometimes they prototype so fast and so quickly that being in Shenzhen is so strategically important. They get their prototyped parts and they're still warm to the touch from just being created, like right at HQ. I mean, and that's like, that can't be ignored. Like, I feel like, you almost have to be a Chinese company, or you definitely have to have, heavy operations in China or in a very strategic area like that, because that's just like gargantuan engineering force and power to prototype and production. It's really impressive. And yeah, some of the other, like, I'm sure 3DR's only got like a couple hundred maybe engineers to kind of go head to head with that. So
yeah, and they tried to manufacture in the U.S. or maybe it was Mexico. At first they tried to manufacture in North America at first, and didn't have a lot of luck. And so then they moved over to China, but it took a while to find a reliable supplier. I think that had a lot to do with the initial problems with the gimbal. And always, they're straddling between the executive team being and design team and engineers being here and the manufacturing being in Shenzhen. DJI is really unique and really fascinating in the sense that they are the first, Chinese born and bred hardware company of the modern, technology era to be globally successful above and beyond anybody else. Like Xiaomi or somebody who makes phones is extremely successful, but in China, right? Not globally bigger than Apple or Android. But DJI is bigger, from the standpoint of consumer drones and maybe even from the standpoint of all non-military drones than anybody that I can think of. And that's in every continent.
Did you said Xiaomi? Is that the one that looks like it's spelled in my American accent Xiaomi?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. So there you go.
I may also be pronouncing it wrong.
I'm sure we both are. It's all good. Okay. So cool. This is a perfect segue. So it's super, super advantageous for DJI being a Chinese company and having all those, advantages. That brings us over to Yuneec. Yuneec is a Chinese company. I don't know. Are they headquartered in Shenzhen as well?
I believe that they are headquartered in Shenzhen. I'm not positive about that, but they're certainly a Chinese company. I think Yuneec has certainly a fighting chance because they have, like you mentioned, they're based in China, which, as we've discussed, can be really advantageous. And then they have a great partner in Intel, who, I think has some cutting edge technology when it comes to computer vision. They have not moved as quickly. So they showed off, a Yuneec with some Intel Realsense at CES 2015. Then they moved forward and, actually like flew it a lot and demoed it a lot at 2016. And then, surprisingly to me, they went ahead and released the product without the Realsense camera, which I thought was strange. Now they're saying they'll release the Realsense camera in the next couple of weeks, and I'll get my hand on a review unit and let you know what I think about how it works. But to me, that sort of illustrates that there is an opportunity. If they had been out in market in 2015 or early 2016, they would have been first with Sense and Avoid. DJI was first. I don't know exactly what happened there or what slowed them down. And I think that there, will always, I'm sure inside the drone industry, there will always be room for more than one company, It's growing so fast that I'm sure everybody could grow in a way that was, healthy for the business or maybe profitable, at the same time as DJI. If we're talking about like whether or not they can sort of catch and compete to be, close to that number one spot, I'm going to hold my judgment until I see what's going on with this, Typhoon H with the Realsense camera. But even there, like I said, when they announced it, right, it was more attractively priced and more feature rich than what DJI currently had on the market. Now, that's not the case because it's been, 7 months since they first announced it and it's not out there, and DJI's released stuff since. So they had an opportunity there to sort of step into the role of, the leader on a new feature set, which is what Solo did, what 3D Robotics Solo did with their autonomous features. And they kind of missed that chance.
Jeez, there's a theme here. There's rapid speed to deployment. It's insane from DJI.
Yeah, and I've written a lot, and I really do believe this. I in our last 3 reviews, I've always said, well, DJI is the best drone you can own. It feels kind of boring. It feels kind of rote at this point, and it's the same way with the iPhone. We always do these roundups, and we always say, well, if you're just somebody who's not super techie, and you're not a hardware geek, you're not cutting edge, you should get the iPhone. It's the simplest.
Yeah,
it's that holy trinity, right? Like price, performance, and ease of use. You're going to get the most out of it, right? And that's true for DJI. I wish that there was a company that was releasing better drones. I would like it to be more competitive. I think that leads to more innovation and lower prices, and it's better for the consumer. And I think people are pushing DJI ahead. I think that the autonomous features and the Sense and Avoid might have been things that they hesitated to release if others hadn't first, because they're extremely risk averse and they don't want to release anything that might not be perfect. So they wouldn't release it unless it was perfect. And they might not have done that if 3D Robotics and Yuneec hadn't pushed the envelope there. But they quickly surpassed them or, beat them to market with that stuff once it was sort of in the air.
Xiaomi or Xiaomi, they announced a competitively priced drone platform. Are you going to be reviewing that?
I have a request in to review that drone, certainly. I have my doubts about how good a drone will be from somebody who's never made one before. But I think one of the things that I was thinking recently, I saw an interesting drone from a startup that's still in stealth that I'll be writing about in the next couple of weeks. And, they were saying that there has been so much advancement in, the kind of, hardware that you can put on board a relatively cheap quad. So they were making the argument that it's now possible for a startup with relatively little funding and experience to build a really compelling camera quad that can do computer vision, because that stuff is no longer proprietary, right? Like, there's sort of an open source version of that. And I think that if that really ends up being true, like, if that stuff becomes sort of table stakes, I think it will be possible for somebody to release something that's more interesting if it was more open to, hardware hackers and racers, and maybe a little bit more sort of highly tuned, something that sort of split the difference between a camera quad and a racing drone. Because I think racing is like the other category that's really captured, the public's imagination. So I don't think you're going to get consumers really just with price point. I think you're going to have to capture their imagination with something else, because, people are in it to spend some money to get great footage. The thing that they might also be interested in considering, if it was an option, was, something that's like a real joy to fly, something that really operates differently than your standard camera quad.
Speaking of companies making a drone who have never made one before, I myself am extremely skeptical. I'm trying to reserve my skepticism here of GoPro's, I guess, announced yet delayed drone called the Karma.
Right.
It's highly anticipated. Obviously, you wrote an article about how they just delayed it until winter. Their revenues have dropped 50%, from last year, and their stock
Right.
price is not doing very well. So I'm wondering if they're hoping that, this drone kind of saves them. But oh my goodness, it could be a similar situation like you already said, these really nice features that like 3DR had released, and they had, this lead, but then, all of a sudden, whoop, DJI comes in, and I'm wondering, I have a sneaking suspicion that they saw the Phantom 4 and realized, well, we got to delay this drone and add a little bit more features to it. I mean, I'm not really sure. Like, what are your thoughts on GoPro entering the drone market?
Yeah, I mean, when they first announced the drone, I thought it could be a really interesting player because, they have so much mind share in sort of the action sports category. And that is, a place where people end up buying a lot of drones, and where, you could easily reach consumers. They walk in to get a GoPro camera because they're big into wakeboarding or, snowboarding or whatever it is. And you say, hey, why don't you check out this drone too? Or, we'll package deal. But then every all the footage that they've released from it, I found really unimpressive. It looks like something I would have shot on a previous generation Phantom. I also shot on the Solo with a GoPro and personally didn't like the footage nearly as much. I mean, the GoPro is not tuned for aerial cinematography. I mean, it's tuned to be a few feet from the person who's wearing it, and so it has a very different It's optimized for different things. I don't think it's really optimized for aerial cinematography. I mean,
Totally agree.
maybe they would release a camera along with it that was different. I haven't heard anything along those lines. I think the idea was always sort of like the camera and the drone will, form this virtuous cycle and drive sales of one another. And then, I mean, the other thing is it's been announced but delayed for so long. I think that, they sort of missed a step. Like they saw, okay, well, the hot thing to get if you were in action sports for a while was, a camera like theirs. And then all of a sudden, it's the hot thing to get started to be a drone. And they didn't see that right away. And then they saw it and they said, okay, well, now we'll make a drone. But then in the time it took them to make a drone, drones became so much more advanced. And so, it would be probably, very, it would be ridiculous to release a drone now that didn't have a lot of features that require, a high level of expertise in terms of autonomy and sense and avoid. And so they may have had to go back to the drawing board. I don't know. But, I think that the way you laid it out sort of makes sense to me.
So yeah, I kind of, I like the whole, I think they're going to sell a hell of a lot of them. I don't know, just by, being GoPro themselves, I really think that there could be a cool play about having like a very rugged drone, something like truly rugged. I mean, the DJI Phantom, the Phantom 4, you can pick it up and it feels like markedly more robust and solid than previous versions, to the point where, I mean, I remember the first time I picked it up, I was like, wow, I like kind of just said it. I was like, damn, this thing's nice. But if they made something that's a bit more, rugged, I mean, obviously props are, made to be kind of broken, but
Right.
We'll have to see what happens. So, cool. Well, we'll pivot a little bit on the conversation, and just quickly touch on Amazon and Google's drone delivery plan. So obviously Google's got Project Wing, Amazon's got the delivery, Amazon Prime, probably same hour or something like that.
Prime Air, they call it.
Prime Air, that's right. So, we've seen Part 107's final rules kind of be released, and there are some provisions in there that are not going to allow for effective drone delivery as Google and Amazon would like to see it, along with other companies, being you cannot operate beyond visual line of sight. You can do this really interesting not really augmented line of sight. If you're in a moving vehicle and you're not operating the vehicle and the drone at the same time, you also have to be in a rural area, and you can't be carrying, though, persons or property for compensation or hire across, state boundaries. So there's really nothing there that helps Google and Amazon. But quick thoughts, just briefly, on the state of drone delivery and where you maybe see that. I'm sure you got some cool opinions on the impending drone delivery business.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I think is that it's already starting to happen in places that are, really eager for it to happen. So like in West Virginia and in Nevada, places with a lot of open space that are looking to sort of nurture new industries that could replace some of the older industries which are failing there. So I think it will start to happen with some regularity in very rural parts of the United States where, at a local state level, it will be authorized and tested. And I think that will help to prove it out. I think the NASA Pathfinder program will help to prove it out, doing lots of stuff already in terms of beyond line of sight and, even, multiple autonomous aircraft operating in the same space. I think the fact that it's happening already in Europe and in Japan will also help, to drive sort of the policy agenda, and to drive the policy making towards, a more permissive environment. I don't anticipate that there'll be drone delivery in, dense metropolitan areas anytime soon. I would be more than happy to be proven wrong. I would let Amazon, land on my rooftop right now. And I do think that it's such a different kind of drone than what we're used to thinking about. It's going to be a very professional, vehicle that's, redundant and safe in the way that, a passenger aircraft or a military aircraft is. And that is going to take off from from a warehouse outside of a city, go up to a high altitude in an open, window where no other aircraft are, be communicating with other aircraft, fly to a point, land, take off and fly back, So in that sense, it's much safer than, flying over a stadium or into some fireworks or around a crowd or at a low level. I mean, all the things that people are constantly doing with, camera drones, and which amazingly so far have led to no, serious accidents or deaths that I'm aware of in the United States. I mean, I know there was a tragic accident in Britain, and there was a guy who killed himself here in the U.S., but he was flying not sort of like a modern quadcopter, an old school gas powered RC thing. So I think that getting back to delivery, I don't know about Project Wing. Like Google doesn't have it sort of all lined up. Like let's say Project Wing started tomorrow. Like how many people are really ordering products from Google on a regular basis, like shopping through Google?
Good point.
Amazon, on the other hand, they're serious about it. They're ready to go. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. They've said this publicly at a few sort of drone-related conventions, but some astounding number of the packages that they ship are under 5 pounds and within 10 miles. So, they fit the criteria for drone delivery.
That is ideal, yeah. Huh. Wow, okay. So I wish we had more time. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us from New York over the airwaves. Once again, Ben is an editor at The Verge, reviewed a lot of the most important drones of the past few years. You can go ahead, you can follow Ben Popper at Ben Popper on Twitter, and you can check out some of his articles, some of the upcoming cool stuff. I'm really interested to learn about that startup that you alluded to that's in kind of stealth mode that you'll be reviewing, and hopefully we can get that, the Intel Realsense review pretty soon. So thanks again for joining us, Ben. One last question is, do you plan on taking the Part 107 knowledge test to be a commercial operator of drones, since you are an aspiring drone pilot and parenting robot?
Yes, I am very excited to take it. I'm pretty sure that there's a place to do it in Manhattan. I'm not aware of like any sort of test prep or like a sort of information about the test having been released yet. But my plan is to take it when it's released in August.
Awesome. I got you covered, man. I already took the practice test. You can take it on FAA. Yeah, you can take it on FAAsafety.gov. I'm going to do a little podcast episode on that too. But yeah, once again, at Ben Popper on Twitter, and you can check his His article's out on theverge.com. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and listening. Hopefully, we can have Ben on the show and discuss some more things later on once the industry progresses a bit more. But if you liked what you heard, you can go ahead and subscribe on iTunes to the podcast. Be sure to leave a rating and a review. It helps out a ton in the very beginning. You can follow us and ask any questions on Twitter at Drones Podcast or Facebook.com/Drones Podcast. I'm Ian Smith. We had Ben Popper from The Verge. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back with another episode shortly. Cheers.
Thanks, Ian.